It was the middle of December, and I had just finished a grueling semester at college. I needed a break, something to clear my head. My best friend, Alex, suggested we rent a cabin in the mountains for a few days. He said it would be the perfect escape. No cell service, no distractions, just the two of us and nature. I agreed, and within a week, we were driving up a winding mountain road, the snow falling steadily around us. The cabin was exactly as advertised, rustic but cozy, tucked deep in the woods with no neighbors in sight. The owner had left the keys under the mat and sent us a list of instructions: how to work the generator, where to find firewood, and a warning to keep the doors locked at night. Bears, he'd said. They're more curious than dangerous, but better safe than sorry. We settled in quickly, unpacking our groceries and starting a fire in the stone fireplace. The first night was peaceful. We played cards, told stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. By midnight, we were both exhausted and decided to turn in. The cabin had 2 bedrooms upstairs, each with a small window overlooking the trees. I fell asleep almost instantly, the sound of the wind in the pines lulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened. The sound was coming from outside, near the front door. I grabbed my phone, but of course there was no signal. I thought about waking Alex, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was just a branch scraping against the house. I crept downstairs, the wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. The fire had died down to embers, casting the room in a dim orange glow. The scratching had stopped, but now I heard something else, a faint tapping, like someone knocking softly on the door. My stomach dropped. Who would be out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? I hesitated, then called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. The tapping stopped. I stood frozen, my hand on the doorknob, debating whether to open it. Finally, I mustered the courage to peek through the small window beside the door. The porch was empty, the snow undisturbed except for a single set of footprints leading up to the door, and then back down the steps. I unlocked the door and stepped outside, the cold biting at my skin. The footprints were small, like a child's, and they disappeared into the trees. I followed them without thinking, my breath visible in the freezing air. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of snow under my boots. The footprints led me to a clearing about 50 yards from the cabin. In the center of the clearing was a small wooden box, its lid slightly ajar. I knelt down and opened it. Inside was a single item, a Polaroid photograph. I picked it up and held it up to the moonlight. The image was blurry, but I could make out 2 figures standing in front of the cabin. One was me. The other was Alex. The photo looked recent. We were wearing the same clothes we'd had on earlier that day. But what sent a chill down my spine was the third figure, barely visible in the background. It was a child standing in the trees, staring directly at the camera. I dropped the photo and stumbled back, my heart racing. When I looked up, I saw movement in the trees, a small figure darting between the pines. I turned and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me and locking it. Alex was awake now, standing at the top of the stairs. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice groggy. I didn't know how to explain what I'd just seen, so I just shook my head. "Nothing." Just thought I heard something. The next morning, I told Alex everything. He laughed it off at first, but when I showed him the photo, his face went pale. We searched the clearing together, but the box was gone, and the snow had covered any trace of footprints. We packed up and left that afternoon, cutting our trip short. I never told anyone else about what happened that night, but sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I think about that child in the photo, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for someone to find them. It was the summer after my freshman year of college, and I needed a break. The stress of exams, late-night study sessions, and the constant buzz of campus life had left me drained. My parents suggested I spend a week at our family's remote cabin in the Adirondacks. They hadn't been there in years, but they assured me it was the perfect place to unwind. It's quiet, peaceful, and completely isolated, my dad said. Just what you need. The cabin was a 3-hour drive from the nearest town, tucked deep in the woods at the end of a dirt road. It was small but cozy, with a wood-burning stove, a creaky porch swing, and a single bedroom upstairs. The surrounding forest was dense, the trees so tall they blocked out most of the sunlight. I arrived just before sunset, the golden light filtering through the leaves as I unpacked my car. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and for the first time in months, I felt myself relax. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I spent my mornings hiking through the woods, my afternoons reading on the porch, and my evenings curled up by the fire. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just me and the quiet hum of nature. But on the third night, everything changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the wall near the headboard. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the house, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened. The scratching stopped, replaced by a soft tapping, like someone knocking gently on the other side of the wall. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling or an animal outside, but the sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I grabbed my flashlight and crept downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty cabin. The tapping seemed to follow me, moving from the bedroom wall to the living room. I shone the flashlight around, but there was nothing there, just the shadows of the furniture and the faint glow of the dying fire. I was about to go back upstairs when I noticed something on the floor near the front door. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it, my hands trembling. The note was written in messy, uneven handwriting. "I'm still here." I dropped the note and backed away, my mind racing. Who could have left it? The cabin had been locked when I arrived, and I hadn't seen anyone since. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and searched the house, but there was no one there. The tapping had stopped, and the cabin was eerily silent. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe left by the last person who stayed here. But the thought didn't bring me any comfort. I spent the day on edge, jumping at every sound, my eyes constantly scanning the trees for movement. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat by the fire, the knife clutched in my hand, and waited. Around midnight, I heard it again, the scratching, louder this time, coming from the attic. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The attic was accessible through a small hatch in the ceiling, and I hadn't even thought to check it when I arrived. The scratching grew more frantic, followed by a low, guttural moan. I wanted to run, to get in my car and drive as far away as possible, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the floor. Then the hatch creaked open. I don't remember much after that. I remember screaming, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, and the feeling of something cold and wet brushing against my arm. I remember running out the door and into the woods, the trees closing in around me as I stumbled through the darkness. I don't know how long I ran, but I eventually made it to the main road, where a passing truck driver found me and called the police. When they searched the cabin, they found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. The attic was empty, save for a few old boxes and a layer of dust. But I know what I heard, what I felt. And I know I'll never go back to that cabin again. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the scratching, and I wonder if whatever was in that attic is still there, waiting for someone else to find it. Last fall, my friend Ellie invited me to her family's cabin in the mountains. It was one of those places you see in postcards, rustic, surrounded by dense forest, and perched on the edge of a steep cliff overlooking a valley. Ellie's family rarely used it, so she had free rein to invite friends whenever she wanted. This time it was just the two of us. She thought it would be a good way to unwind after a brutal semester, and I agreed. The drive up was uneventful, though the road got narrower and more winding the closer we got to the cabin. By the time we arrived, the sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across the property. The cabin itself was charming in a weathered sort of way, with a creaky porch and a stone chimney. Inside it was cozy but sparse. Wooden furniture, a few old books on the shelves, and a faint smell of pine. We spent the first day hiking and exploring the area. The forest was beautiful, but there was something eerie about it too. The trees were so tall and close together that they blocked out most of the sunlight, and the air always felt damp, even when it wasn't raining. That night we built a fire in the fireplace and played cards, laughing and talking until we were too tired to stay awake. I woke up sometime around 2 a.m. to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal outside, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened. The sound was coming from the wall near the window. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it around the room. Nothing. The scratching stopped, but now I heard something else. A faint tapping, like someone knocking softly on the glass. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The window was on the second floor, and there was no way anyone could reach it from the ground. I told myself it was just a branch or a bird, but the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I woke Ellie, and the two of us crept downstairs, our footsteps echoing in the quiet cabin. When we reached the living room, the tapping stopped. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the dying fire. Ellie grabbed a poker from the fireplace, and I picked up a heavy flashlight, holding it like a weapon. We searched the cabin, but there was no one there. Just as we were about to give up, I noticed something on the kitchen table, a small, folded piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it, my hands trembling. The note was written in messy, uneven handwriting. "You shouldn't have come back." Ellie and I stared at each other, our faces pale. Neither of us had been to the cabin in years, so the note didn't make any sense. We locked all the doors and windows and spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, too scared to sleep. The next morning, we searched the property for any signs of an intruder, but there was nothing. No footprints, no broken windows, no evidence that anyone had been there. We tried to brush it off as a prank, but the note had shaken us. We decided to cut the trip short and leave that afternoon. As we were packing, I noticed something strange in the woods. About 50 yards from the cabin, there was a small clearing with a single tree in the center. Hanging from one of the branches was a rope tied into a noose. My stomach turned as I realized it was positioned perfectly to be seen from the cabin's windows. We left without another word, driving in silence until we reached the main road. Ellie called her parents to tell them what had happened, and they promised to have someone check the property. A few days later, they called back to say everything was fine. No signs of trespassing, no evidence of anyone being there. But I know what I saw, and I know that note wasn't meant for Ellie. It was meant for me. I haven't been back to the cabin since, and I don't plan on ever going again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that noose and wonder who put it there and why.